The Cartoonerific podcast is sponsored by the wonderful world of Animation Gallery, home of rare and wonderful fine animation art. Visit their website at wwagallery.com. And for our Cartoonerific listeners, you will receive a special 10% discount off any purchase if you purchase by March 25th, 2024. Just go to wwagallery.com and enter code CARTOON10 for your 10% discount. Once again, this discount is only valid until midnight, March 25th, 2024. Once again, visit wwagallery.com.
The Cartoonerific podcast is now available on Spotify, Google, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Alexa, TuneIn, Podcast Addict, Player FM, Apple Podcasts, and many, many others. If you like what you hear, please subscribe. A new Cartoonerific podcast is uploaded every Friday.
Welcome to Cartoon Fun, it's Cartoonerific, yeah! It's Cartoonerific, Cartoonerific, it's Cartoonerific, with your host Brian Mitchell.
Welcome to the Cartoonerific podcast, classic animated cartoons. I am Brian Mitchell, and I am your host. You know, when I got into the animation business, actually before I got into the animation business, when I was growing up, I was inspired by a lot of different cartoons. I love cartoons. I eventually ended up really liking Chuck Jones' Warner Brothers cartoons and some of the specials he did. I really love Disney. A big Disney fan. I absolutely love the wonderful world of color, the wonderful world of Disney. That's what it became later on. And I was hooked onto that show primarily because of the animation, but I liked some of the other stuff too. I really liked the MGM cartoons, and especially Tex Avery, the Tom and Jerry's. I even liked Woody Woodpecker. But there was a lot of different things that I liked. And I liked a lot of the TV specials too. And anyway, there's certain things that motivate you and inspire you. And for me, it was a motion picture called The Jungle Book. That was a picture that really made me sit up and take notice, because the animation was so good and it was so believable. I had seen Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I loved Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. But my motivation was The Jungle Book. And when you talk to different people, different animators that are working in the business today, everybody has their inspirations. So back in the 30s, when Disney was looking for people, a lot of these people came into the animation profession not necessarily driven by inspiration to want to work in the animation profession. A lot of these people were they were artists. They wanted to become fine artists. Some of them wanted to be illustrators. They wanted to work in magazines. Some of them were comic strip artists. And Disney was offering these people a job. And so a lot of them came into the animation profession because they're getting paid to do this work. And some of them ended up really liking it. And people like Milt Kahl, who was really an illustrator, he was in San Francisco as an illustrator. He ended up taking a job with Disney. Same thing with Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston, who wanted to be fine artists. Well, unfortunately, that may not put food on the table and pay for your rent. And so they ended up working for Walt Disney, and they ended up liking the job. But later on, as people saw some of the stuff that the Disney Studio was doing, people were inspired. And so there are people that really love Fantasia or Bambi Dumbo. And maybe this one picture was a big inspiration for a lot of people who go into the profession. It was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I had seen Snow White early on. I actually, when I was studying, when I was in my teens, I was studying animation. They used to sell these Super 8 films, and you could put it on a Super 8 projector. It's basically, Super 8 is a smaller film medium. So when you go to a movie theater, a lot of times they're projecting a 35 millimeter or 70 millimeter film. Well, those are big pieces of film. Super 8 was about maybe a fourth of the size of a 35 millimeter film. Okay. So Super 8, you got 8, you got 16, you got 35 millimeter. And 16 millimeter was shown in schools. 35 millimeter was generally shown in motion picture houses. So the Super 8 medium was strictly considered a home medium. It was something that you could buy at your local store, and you could bring it home and enjoy it at home. The thing with these films were they were only maybe about anywhere between 3 to 8 minutes long, but you'd have a little excerpt of the film. And I remember having a black and white print of they called it the Dwarf's Dilemma, which is basically the wash sequence from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And I absolutely loved it. Totally wonderful looking in black and white. The film is in color, of course. But it looks so good in black and white. And I had another little snippet from Cinderella, which absolutely looked terrific as well. So those things really got to me as I was looking at them years later. But just going back to Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, that did inspire a lot of different people to get into the animation medium. And our next guest is no different. He is a legend in the business. He was inspired by Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. He was totally enchanted with the movie. And it inspired him to want to pursue the medium of cartoons and animation. He is the winner of the Winsor McCay Award, which is not given to too many people. It's basically given to people that have significant accomplishments in the animation industry, and it's from ASIFA, the International Animated Film Society. It was given to him at the 48th Annual Annie Awards in 2021. I'm so happy to have him on, and I hope you are too. His name is Willie Ito. He's worked on a lot of your favorite cartoons over the years. He's up next. Please stay tuned. Don't go away.
Cartoonerific is the place to be to celebrate hand-drawn animated cartoons. The Cartoonerific podcast features interviews with the magic makers behind your favorite animated cartoons, with episodes uploaded every Friday. Or visit the Cartoonerific blog featuring articles about classic cartoon animation. At the Cartoonerific Gallery, view original animation art and memorabilia from your favorite animated films and TV shows. The company store features exclusive swag from the Cartoonerific universe. And coming soon, brand new world premiere cartoons on the Cartoonerific channel. It's all here. Join the fun at www.cartoonerific.com. That's cartoon, ERIFIC.com. It's Cartoonerific, saving the universe one funny cartoon at a time. And now it's time for our special Cartoonerific guest.
Hi, and welcome back. Today we have a very, very, very special guest. That's 3 verys that he gets. He's worked at the Walt Disney Studio. He worked at Warner Brothers. Ended up working on Beanie and Cecil with Bob Clampett. He's worked with a lot of great figures. And then he went on to work on the Jetsons and many Hanna Barbera cartoons. He ended up in merchandising with the Walt Disney Company, working on, I guess, T-shirts and toys and stuff like that. All these wonderful images. He's a wonderful artist. Please welcome Willie Ito. Hi, Willie. How you doing today?
Hi, Brian. Thanks for having me on your show.
Well, thank you. So I want to talk to you about your days, I guess, growing up, thinking about animation. How'd you get into the animation profession? When did you start thinking about it?
Yeah, well, I was born and raised in San Francisco in a little enclave known as Japantown, and it was 1939. I was 5 years old, and went to the neighborhood theater and saw Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs on the big screen in living Technicolor. And when the seven little dwarfs marched across the screen singing "Hi ho, it's off to work we go," I said, "That's it. That's what I want to be." No, not one of the seven dwarfs, but animated cartoonist, and so my future was sealed.
That's
Anything to do with comics, comic book work, comic strips, work in animation, or whatever. But as long as I could hold a pencil and make funny pictures, that was my future.
There you go. I hear that story over and over and over again. Somebody saw something, it hit them, and then basically they wanted to go into the field. So did you contact anybody at a young age, or did you just draw and draw and draw, and then what finally led you into the field?
Well, actually, an unfortunate situation happened to us Japanese Americans. World War II hit, and we were all sent to internment camps.
Yes.
And while I was in camp, there wasn't really too much to do except run around in the alkaline dust outside or try to stay cool, because the barracks that we lived in was not insulated. It was just a wooden structure covered with tar paper. So during the summer, it was extremely hot, and during the winter, it was extremely cold.
Yeah.
During the cold months, of course, every 3 months, we would receive a Sears and Roebuck and a Montgomery Ward catalogs, because we had no stores in camp. So we had to mail order our needs, clothing and whatever else.
Right.
And so every 3 months, we would get a new catalog. And so I would take the expired catalogs, and in the margins, I would draw little figures running, jumping, bouncing balls, and whatever, right. and made a flip book, and that was my very early foray into the art of animation.
I heard Iwo was in there too, wasn't he? Internment camp?
Yeah, Iwo was in a camp called Manzanar, which was in central California, right under the Sierra Madre mountain range. And he himself, he was older. When the war broke out, he had just graduated high school and he was ready for college. But with the interruption of the war, he was unable to continue his education.
Right.
So he was quite resentful in camp. As the war came close to an end and we were all allowed to leave camp, he would just thought, now what am I going to do? First of all, the family was broke. They were unable to put him through college. And then secondly, he's at that age where he was totally lost. And fortunately, there were a couple of Japanese animators that worked in the studios prior to the war, and they befriended Iwo. They knew his beautiful artwork and suggested that he fill up a couple of 10-cent notebooks and with drawings and sketches and cartoons and whatever, which Iwo did. And so at the closure of the war, and he was, able to leave camp, he submitted the sketchbooks to Disney Studio, and they looked at it and they said, "Hey, this kid is good. Hire him." So it goes to show that the animation field is very colorblind. It didn't matter who you were or what you were, or for that matter, incarcerated in a wartime camp.
Right.
They just saw the beautiful drawings, and he was hired. So he was really the very first Japanese American that was in the mainstream of the animation business, like a Walt Disney Studio.
Right.
Yeah, fortunately, my father was born in Hawaii, and so he was what you would consider Nisei, or second generation.
Mm-hmm.
So he was a little more optimistic. And so at the onset of the war, when we got orders that we would be sent to camp, rather than sell our home or do something desperate, he asked the Chinese family, which was a good family friend, to move in, live in the house, and take care of it. And eventually, when we returned, we had a home to come back to. And so that was very fortunate.
Very smart.
Whereas,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
The rest of the community, they had sold off and left and everything behind and did whatever. So when they were released from camp, they had nothing. So they had to sleep on cots in the church gymnasium or YMCA or wherever they could house these people.
Right. That's pretty sad that,
it was quite a time.
Yeah. So you were able to move back into your home, and what transpired from there? How did you move on, and did you still consider animation the thing? Because some people some people lose their way. Like I'm just saying, I had a lot of different interests, but I always loved animation, and I got away from it. And then I decided one day, I was like, yeah, no, this is what I want to do. This is what I've always wanted to do. Yeah.
Well, I remember a ritual that I always had. Every Sunday morning, I would run downstairs, open the front door, and there would be the Sunday San Francisco Chronicle and the San Francisco Examiner. And as you remember, in those days, those comic pages were chock full of beautiful comic strips like Prince Valiant, and I used to love the Disney Mickey Mouse and Donald Ducks and all. And so I would immediately make beeline for the Sunday paper, and then I would just spend hours just looking at all these comic strips. And so while we were incarcerated, we lost the luxury of having comic books or even the daily newspaper to see comics. One day, the Topaz Times, which was a mimeographed camp newspaper, came out, and I happened to look through it, and it was a comic strip drawn by one of our Japanese American kids that actually worked in the animation field before the war, and he had a little comic strip that he was drawing specifically for the Topaz Times, and that really got me excited that now there was another comic strip done by a fellow Japanese American kid, and I followed that comic voraciously, and that kept my interest in cartooning, really going. And so I never really lost it. There was always something that gave me some kind of a reminder that was in my destiny.
Understood. Could you tell the audience, I mean, a lot of people today, when they get the comic sections now are just nothing of a newspaper.
Nothing.
And years ago, and I'm I'm a kid of the 60s, right? So back in the 60s, when you opened up the comic section of especially the Sunday paper, it was massive. It was like its own section.
Oh my gosh, it was beautifully printed and living color, and it was just magnificent, And when I reflect on the workmanship that Hal Foster put into his Prince Valiant strips and Milton Caniff and the Terry and the Pirates and Steve Canyon, it was just really something. And then, of course, the Disney strips like the Mickey Mouse and the Donald Duck were just awesome.
They were. They're wonderful.
Yeah. They were.
Were you going to movies at that point? I mean, was that a thing at the time for you, or did it take a while before you got back to see movies?
Now, prior to the war, see, my father was always kind of a gadget freak, and he would, we always had a home movie camera and took movies of my sister and I growing up and whatever. So whatever movies that he took that week and had developed, on Saturday night, he would pull out his Keystone projector and pull down the screen, and we'd all gather in the living room, and it was movie night. And of course, we would see his latest home movies that he took of us, but he would accompany it with the old Castle films of the old black and white Mickey Mouse, Oswald the Rabbit cartoons. And I grew up watching animation from a very early age, and then twice a week, like Wednesday evenings and Sunday evenings, was our family outing. We would go out and have a nice Chinese dinner and then walk a few blocks to the Uptown Theater, which was our neighborhood theater, and see Looney Tunes and newsreel and coming attractions and a great double feature. Right. And it was at that very theater that I saw the Disney cartoons, the Silly Symphonies and all in color. But Snow White was the one that really, really made an impression.
Sure. So how'd you get into the Disney Studio? Did you write to them? Did they, kind of give you an idea of like what they were looking for? Or did you just fill up some sketchbooks? I mean, how did that happen?
It was a fluke. I have to really say that my getting into Disney was something that I would have never expected. What happened is I just completed 2 years at San Francisco City College. I had a wonderful life drawing instructor. And so my friends, because we were all post-war kids, going to college, they were all going on to like Stanford and Berkeley and San Francisco State and universities, going into things like pre-med, dentistry, pharmacy, and the girls in our group were all going into teaching. And I kind of felt that, gee, I'm gonna go in to make animated cartoons, and that kind of seemed a little frivolous and kind of humanitarian, so to speak.
Right.
And so I went to my instructor and I said, Mr. Beats, I think I'm going to change, and I'm going to focus on becoming a medical illustrator. He looked me straight in the eye and shook his head and said, "No, you're not." And he says, "I'm going to write you a letter of introduction to Don Graham, who is a dean of Chouinard's Art Institute in Los Angeles." And of course, as you know, Chouinard's is now today California Institute of the Arts, CalArts.
Yes.
One of the prominent animation schools. So I took the summer, made my way down to Los Angeles. I met with Mr. Graham. He looked at my portfolio and offered me a working scholarship for the summer. And I thought, wow, wonderful, So I was very excited, and of course, I'm in one of my instructor happens to be Mark Davis, who was one of the 9 old men, and then my cartooning teacher was Teehee, who was a writer-director at UPA, which at that time was the hottest studio in town, with their Magoo and Gerald McBoing series. So I was now taking classes, night classes and all, but I thought, as long as I'm down here in Los Angeles and I have my students' portfolio with me, I'm going to use it as a ticket to visit the Disney Studios. So I called up personnel, and they said, yeah, come on in, made an appointment for me. And so I figured, well, yeah, this way I'll be able to see the studio, see the landmark street sign, Mickey Avenue, Dopey Drive, see the animation building, all the pictures that I've seen in books about Walt Disney and that movie, Reluctant Dragon. And I thought, wow, that's really that will be my highlight for the summer. So I made my trek to the Disney Studio, and it was a very hot June summer. It must have been about 96, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon in Burbank, and I was dressed in my San Francisco best, my tweed jacket and my heavy woven slacks and the whole bit, sweating like a dog. And I walk into the animation building, and I go to the elevator and press the button, and elevator door swings open, and then standing before me is Walt Disney.
Oh, there you go.
Now he's with an associate. They're deeply in conversation, but as Walt steps into the elevator, he sees me cowering in the corner in the back of the elevator and gives me a polite nod of acknowledgement. Then they both turn around and they continue their conversation. And let me tell you, that was the world's longest 4 flights trip on the elevator I have experienced.
Yes, I can imagine. Jeez.
So anyhow, I go in to have my interview. Now, I certainly not expecting to get hired, because I figured I got 4 years of Chenards to prepare a real professional portfolio, at which time I would come back and seriously look for work. So Ken Sealing, who is the personnel director, he gets on the intercom and says, Mr. Ito's here for his appointment. And so, a couple of minutes later, in comes 2 guys into the office, and one is a fellow named Andy Ingman, who is the production supervisor, and following behind him is this little Asian guy, and he's kind of walking behind big Andy Ingman, like Droopy Dog would in a Tex Avery cartoon. And then I noticed, oh my, he's Asian fella. And so when we were introduced, they said, well, I'd like you to meet Yuo Takamoto. And I thought to myself, oh, Takamoto, well, that's Japanese, So we met, and then they took my portfolio into the conference room. They asked me to wait out in reception, and then about 15, 20 minutes later, Mrs. Sealing came out and said, well, thank you for coming in. We enjoyed looking at your portfolio, but don't call us, we'll call you. And I said, yeah, that's fine. I'm thinking of myself. Okay, I'll see you in 4 years. And so I took my sweet time leaving the Disney Studio, because at that time they had these beautiful originals from Snow White and Pinocchio and Fantasia, all displayed on the walls,
Oh,
of
yeah.
course, now, with an X-Acto knife, these things found a way to disappear. So now they have prints up there, But anyhow,
Right.
about 2 weeks later, I come home late from my night class, and there's a Western Union telegram stuck on my door. And I'm thinking, oh, my gosh, back in the 50s, a Western Union telegram could only mean real good news or real bad news.
Right.
And having my parents back in San Francisco, I thought, oh, my goodness. So I gingerly opened up the telegram, and on the top headline, this is from Walt Disney Production. And then as I read on, it invited me to come in the following Monday to take a test.
Oh, wow.
So I thought, oh, my goodness. So that Monday, I found my way to Disney Studio and walked onto the, ever famous hallowed halls of Disney, and went up, and they gave me my test. And after then I turned it in at noon and took a lunch break. And when I came back at 1 o'clock, I was told that I was hired.
Wow.
And I was pretty much blown away.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, yeah, we'll start you in the lady unit. Well, back then, of course, as you know, we had ink and paint department, which was basically all ladies.
Right.
So my assumption was that I was going to do an entry-level apprenticeship or whatever as an ink and paint person.
Right.
And I had no idea that there was a production called Lady and the Tramp,
Right.
in the works. And so it turned out that they were going to put me in with assisting Iwo Takamoto on the ladies. And so the very first scene that I was assigned to happened to be the very iconic spaghetti kissing scene. So,
Oh, wow. Wow.
So that was quite a beginnings of my career.
That was a very long scene. I mean, footage-wise, do you remember how long the footage was on that? I mean, there's no cuts in that scene. It's basically panning from.
Yes, and that was the problem. And so Frank Thomas, who animated Lady, he wanted it really slowed down, and so he actually had half numbers put in between, as in between drawings, and so it was very arduously tight and very precision-like, and Iwo was so good at doing that. First of all, Iwo had gotten a reputation around the studio that he was an expert on cute characters, and they would always have him doing key assistant animation on characters such as Aurora and Cinderella and like Lady, and when Sleeping Beauty came down the pike, he was assigned to key all of the Aurora close-ups and all, Right. And so Lady in that particular spaghetti kissing sequence was a close-up, and like you say, it was a long scene, and so it was, it felt like months. It basically felt like that's the only scene I worked on while Lady and the Tramp was in production. However, I did work on some other scenes, but
Sure.
that seemed to be the most long-lasting, you might say. And then we went on overtime. and the film was behind schedule and way over budget. So they asked everyone to work overtime, which cut into my night classes. So I was only able to limit my class for weekends.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, my career just sort of really took off because after Lady and the Tramp was completed, and they asked us to take a 3-month hiatus before Sleeping Beauty came down the pike.
Right.
I called Warner Brothers, and I got hired because when I originally went to see Warner's that very same summer, I visited Disney's. The production manager said, "Yeah, we like your portfolio very much, and we would hire you now, except we don't train." And so with that in mind, the day I got notice that we would have to take a hiatus, I immediately called Johnny Burton at Warner Brothers and said, "Hey, I'm trained now." So he says, "Come on in Monday morning." And he started my new career. And of course, I started at the infamous Termite Terrace.
Oh, wow. So you weren't in Burbank. You were were you in Hollywood at that point?
I was in Hollywood at Termite Terrace.
Right. Now, okay, before we move on to Warner Brothers, the question I have for you, when you were at Disney, were you in-betweening, or were you doing rough in-between, or were you doing just the tight cleanups, or what was your official position or positions?
Well, I guess the category I was in was in-betweening.
Right.
And they would refer to me as one of Ewo's assistants, and but basically it was in-betweening.
Right.
And so as an in-betweener, and then I left Disney and started at Termite Terrace, and I was in the bullpen. But apparently my in-betweens, because of the Disney training, was so precise that the animator, Ken Harris, I happened to work on one of his scenes, and he flipped it and says, "My gosh, I love the way, this, the cleanups and the in-betweens are done." So I was immediately requested by Ken Harris to join the Chuck Jones unit.
Right.
And so I joined Chuck Jones in just a matter of weeks after starting at Termite Terrace. And of course, the bump in pay went accordingly.
Right.
And so 3 months later, when Disney did call me back, I told them, "Well, I'm making assistant animation pay right now." And they said, "Well, we can't pay you that because, you left that as an in-betweener. So, but we could give you the next category, which is known as breakdown." And then, of course, the cartoon industry is all unionized. So the pay rates are same with all the studios,
Right.
And so I thought, well, I think I'm going to stay with Warner, and my career was really starting to move because now working in Chuck Jones's unit and being able to do a lot of things other than just assistant work, was doing some junior layouts and B animation and the whole bit.
Right.
So I decided to stay at Warner Brothers. And I always kind of remember in the back of my head when people say, "Well, Disney, if they call you back and you don't go back, they'll never invite you back again." So with that in mind, I figured my career at Disney is over.
Right.
And so I figured I better be content working on the outside,
Right.
But,
But that's, sometimes when you go to work for different places, I would imagine Warner Brothers was a little bit looser in terms of,
it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's probably more enjoyable in that environment. So
Yeah, it was. Yeah, because suddenly, I'm realizing that here are some of the guys that I worked with back at Disney, and actually, I even was surpassing Iwo Takamoto in that area,
right.
and so. See, Iwo was so good at what he did that he was typecasted.
Mm-hmm.
And so he wanted to animate and get credits and this and that. But all of the 9 men, they said, well, I've got this key character and I need someone like Iwo Takamoto to follow up on it.
Yeah, to make me look good. Make me look good.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was what the stigma that poor Iwo had to face, although he was extremely talented. And then, of course, needless to say, after he started at Hanna Barbera, my gosh, all hell broke loose with him. And he became one of the foremost great character designers and all that. And he virtually made Hanna Barbera, beyond the Bill and Joe's, earlier concepts of shows like Flintstones and Jetsons, and then once Iwo took the helm of designing, and then shows like Scooby Doo and shows of that nature emerged.
Yeah, I mean, he basically influenced everything. I mean, Charlotte's Web, the feature they did, and once they ditched the Ed Benedict look, because the shows, I guess they felt they had to get more sophisticated. Then then all of a sudden it was just Iwo Takamoto Productions. Very. I met him at Hanna-Barbera back in the 80s. I was struck by he was very much a gentleman, very very nice man. And
yes.
Now I want to tell you something. I met you when I came out to California. I met you at the Disney store at the Glendale Galleria, and I think you had.
Wow.
And
yeah.
And what's funny, I had just gotten into the business. It might have been 1989, 1990. But you were in the Disney store, and I recognized you. I don't know how I recognized you. I didn't know how. I just looked at you and I said, "Are you Willie Ito?" And so we had like a 15-minute conversation.
Good.
Yeah.
I hope I was present.
Oh, you're wonderful. You were wonderful. But I was totally aware of all the stuff that you worked on. And
wow.
Yeah, but it was it was a little bit of a thrill for me to meet you, because I knew a little bit about your history. So
I'm honored. Thank you.
Well,
yeah.
no, I'm the one that's honored. Jeez. But anyway, let's get back to Warner Brothers. So a question for you at Warner Brothers, because somebody just brought this up with Hawley Pratt. There's practically no interviews. There's like no information about this man. And I heard he was a brilliant draftsman as far as he was a great layout guy, but I heard he was also a good character guy as well.
Yes, he was. Yeah, over in Chuck's unit, we had Maurice Noble, and he did some beautiful background graphic designs and things for Chuck. And I felt that Hawley Pratt himself was one of the real true masters of illustrating golden books, as well as making Frizz's cartoons look so good.
Right.
So I always regarded Hawley as I was very happy to be mentored by him. And so, but you're right. He was a little quiet, a little more subdued, and like you say, there's no real interviews or articles about Hawley or whatever.
No, none at all. But I'm fully aware of the influence that he had on Frizz's cartoons.
All right, yeah.
When you were working, do you remember? There's the Chuck Jones book, Chuck-a-Muck, that's out there, and I mean, basically, Chuck talks about, I guess, the production schedule on these cartoons was like 5 weeks in animation. Was it like 5 weeks in animation with an overlap for the cleanup or the in-betweens on that? Do you remember?
Well, I always kind of felt that each department was given the 5 or 6 weeks, whatever it was, to do their bit. So I'm assuming, like Mike Maltese doing the stories had a 5-week schedule, and then when it came down to like layout and background, we all had the 5-week schedule,
Right.
And of course, the output from Disney to Warner Brothers was, the first couple of days. It took me a bit to get used to, because at Disney we were turning out 6 to 8 drawings a day, 1 an hour. And so we come over to Warner Brothers, and the first scene they give me is a Speedy Gonzalez scene, and I was proudly, just boasting that, wow, I got 13 drawings done today. And I was in for a rude awakening, because one of the guys in the bullpen said, well, you're supposed to average 30 drawings a day.
Oh, jeez. And that's tight. That's tight in betweens. That's not rough in between. That's basically you're doing the breakdown and the in between and all that, right?
Yeah, because these are the drawings that would go to ink and paint, and they always says, the girls could get sloppy and lose a certain percentage of your drawing. That's the reason why your drawing has to be really, really tight, to allow for that little few degrees of loss, But the pressure at Warner Brothers was, sure, from Disney, it was somewhat severe. But when I went to Hanna Barbera and encountered the kind of footage that the animators were turning out and we all had to do in layout, it was like, oh my goodness. I mean, it was totally night and day from Disney days, So, but as you know, we all learn to adjust, and we all kind of know where to let things go. Because at Disney, every drawing, every stroke was so precious. But at Warner's, you loosen up a little bit. But at Hanna Barbera, you really, really loosened up.
Oh yeah.
So but it was such an interesting challenge for all of us, starting in the golden age of animation and then having it accelerate to such a point, that, it was like, wow, do I have to maintain this kind of pace 8, 10, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week?
Was it? You worked 5 days a week at Warner Brothers, or was it a 6-day week, or how'd that? And was it an 8-hour day? I mean,
yeah, Warner's was 8-hour day, and you did your quota, and if you were able to maintain your 30 drawings a day, you could take a longer lunch. Of course, they had these old-fashioned time clocks at Warner's that you had to punch. Was kind of unique, because thereafter, places like Hanna Barbera, it was pretty much honor system, or you were salaried, So, but Warner's went by the books.
Oh, jeez. So
it was.
So you were doing the in-betweens, and then when did you move into layout? How'd that happen? You got into layout, right?
Yeah, Chuck knew that there was myself and a fellow named Corny Cole, and a fellow named Bob Bransford. The three of us, we were the key assistants to our respective animators, and so we would be throwing a bone once in a while. Our animators will let us do some animation on some of the simpler scenes. But I found myself more inclined to do layouts, because when I was at Bob Clampett's, that's pretty much what I did: character designs and layouts, and also at when I was at Warner Brothers, I was, you might say, more or less being groomed to do that. So Chuck Jones would have us, animate on a 6 weeks basis. And then if he needed some storyboards or some layouts or character designs, he would have myself or Corny take it on. Right. And so finally, Holly was being groomed to become Frizz's director. And so Frizz went to Chuck and says, "Hey, you think I could borrow Willie for one picture for 6 weeks?" And so I was loaned out to Frizz Freeling. I moved my stuff to one of the empty offices in his unit. And then under Holly Pratt's guidance, I laid out my very first Bugs Bunny Yosemite Sam episode called Prince Varmint. And that gave me my very first Warner Brothers screen credit,
That's wonderful.
Apparently, yeah, it was quite a thing. As a matter of fact, I've got the actual screen credit card and everything in my portfolio.
Oh, wow. So, that's wonderful.
And so it looked as if Frizz was happy, Holly was happy, and I was destined to become Frizz's layout man. That's when Bob Clampett called. Now, I never met Bob, or I never worked with him, but how he heard of me, I have no idea. And so he invited me to come over and redesign his puppet characters, and then thereafter work in the layout department, So, and at that time, he actually doubled my salary, weekly salary.
Oh, wow.
And my wife was pregnant, and so it was an offer I just couldn't refuse.
No. And
so when I,
it's the one thing I just want to say is, when somebody good comes to town, I saw this happen in the 80s and 90s, like an exceptional talent, all of a sudden that name gets around. People start talking about that person. And sounds like that's what happened to you, so.
Well, gee, I'm glad people like to talk.
So
at first, it was kind of a hard decision, because knowing that I'm going to get a chance to become a steady layout man with someone like Frizz, it was kind of a hard decision. And so when I went to Chuck and Frizz and says, I got this offer from Bob, and of course, Bob was kind of known as a kind of a zany guy amongst all of the Warner Brothers directors,
Right.
And So they said, well, when you go with Bob Clampett, you're going to be working on TV. We do theatrical shorts, and we're going to be around forever. And so with that in mind, it was kind of a rough decision until I got this offer. But 6 months after I started with Bob Clampett, then Warner Brothers was seeing the horizon, kind of a dark horizon. And then, unfortunately, Disney's shorts department closed. And, of course, MGM was long gone, and Warner Brothers was working on the incredible Mr. Limpet feature, using a lot of the Disney animators that were let go. And you could see the complexion of the theatrical business was waning, and television was now on the horizon. And so I'm sort of glad that I stuck it out with Clampett. Unfortunately, he was never able to get another show. We did make a valiant presentation with the Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy show to be done in animation.
Right.
And we did a wonderful presentation with Edgar Bergen and Francis Bergen and Candice Bergen. And there was a half hour that was available with ABC. And so it was up to either Clampett getting that or Hanna Barbera getting that half hour. And what happened is, of course, Hanna Barbera got that half hour. And so I got a call and says, hey, we're starting on a new show called The Jetsons. And we understand you might be wrapping up with Bob Clampett. I said, okay, well, I guess I'll see you Monday.
Yeah, sometimes that's the way it goes. You just jump from one project to another.
Exactly.
And in retrospect, it seems like you made all the right decisions for your career. Because you really don't know, when you're going into this field and you're working on stuff and sometimes, you make these decisions and you're not sure if it's the right one or not, but you just do it anyway because it feels right to you,
Right. Right.
Yeah. Sometimes things just work out. So seems like
one of the things that, like before Hanna and Barbera, was really they had just done Rough and Ready and the Huckleberry Hound and Yogi Bear show, and I thought, wow, these shows look great. They're great for television and the whole bit. So I did make a visit to them. They were housed at the old Charlie Chaplin studio on La Brea, and I walked onto the lot, and I just thought to myself, oh my gosh, this is where Charlie Chaplin made all of his classic films and whatever. So I finally went to Joe's office, and he looked at my portfolio, and then he kind of studied it. And then he says, well, yeah, thanks for coming in, but we don't draw this way. And so I thought, oh, okay. And so I kind of left it at that. And then, of course, in retrospect, after I got started, we all learned to draw in that Hanna-Barbera. At that time, it was Ed Benedict and Dick Mickenbach, and these were the guys that were doing the models, and we just follow it, And eventually, when Ewo took over and started doing models, I kind of ate Ewo's style from way back because I admired his work so much,
Right.
So,
right. How was Dick? Dick Bickenbach was he was an amazing talent himself,
Oh, he was.
He did all the layouts for like the Tom and Jerry cartoons, didn't he? All the character layouts.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, those guys at MGM, they were a bunch of geniuses there in their own right, because they, of course, the Tom and Jerry series that H&B did is by far the best of the lot. Gene Deitch did it, even Chuck Jones did it, and whatever. But the original Hanna Barbera MGM version was really great. Of course, later on down the line, Hanna Barbera did retain the Tom and Jerry franchise, I guess you might say, and they did have some of the original animators on it, but it just kind of lost the flavor. And then, of course, today with Warner Brothers doing the Tom and Jerry's, it looks good graphically, but it just doesn't have that good old Hanna-Barbera zip to it,
Yeah, no, I know what you're talking about.
Do you have any questions or comments about the podcast? Please email Brian at cartoonerific.com. Your email may be featured in one of our future shows.
Hi, well, welcome back. Thank you, Willie Ito, for a great first part of our two-part interview. Next week is part 2, so please stay tuned for that. If you really like what you're listening to, please recommend us to a friend. I'm sure you have at least one or two friends out there that like cartoons and they want to hear about the making of some of these things. So please turn them on to the podcast. If you really like what we're doing, please subscribe. We are available on just about every service on the planet. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, many, many others. So please go to your favorite. Please subscribe there so this way you stay up to date with all the new stuff coming. We have some great guests coming up in the weeks ahead, so I'm very excited about that. But anyway, I want you all to have a great day. I want you to have a terrific week. And I want to thank you so much for tuning in.
This has been a Cartoonerific Studios presentation.
The Cartoonerific Podcast is copyright 2024 by Cartoonerific Studios Incorporated. All rights reserved.